Thanks so much for having me here. I come back almost every year to canoe the Green River from Green River to the confluence, and to spend a few happy days in Moab and drive down the Escalante grade and love it. In his book comparing the United States and Canada, written many years ago, the great political scientist and sociologist Seymour Martin Lipset said that he who knows one country knows none. And so I've taken that to heart. And so when Representative Ivory says, where do we go from here, I suggest we go abroad for a while and then return back to the United States. And while he mentioned the Green Paper, we didn't get one up here, but while he mentioned the Green Paper, let me suggest this. This document that he provided is filled with platitudes. Now, platitudes can be true or platitudes can be false, but the function of a university, among other things, is to take platitudes and to work through them, to offer empirical evidence and tough-minded analysis to see whether they hold up or not, or ought to be abridged or altered or shaped or modified or reinforced and asserted with greater confidence. So that's the spirit in which I want to begin my talk today. Now, federalism is one of several structures by which a government can be organized. It's often compared with unitary systems, but it can be compared with consociational systems and still others. So corporatist structures as well. So you have so federalism is a structure for organizing government, and it's one among many. And what I would like us to do is keep in mind Lipset's argument that if we know only one, we don't know any, perhaps, and say that it's really important to look at more than one place so we can distinguish the characteristics of the structure of federalism from the characteristics, the many other characteristics of a country that might happen to be federal. The mountains and valleys, the peaks, the liberty-loving quality of its inhabitants, whether peasants own land or don't own land, and the nature of the political parties, whether there's separation of powers, and so on. All of those things come together, and looking only at one country, it's very difficult to extract out what is inherent in the structure of federalism from any of a variety. The same thing could be said of unitary system, consociational, and so on. So that's what I'm trying to do. So the central question I would ask is, and it seems to me the most obvious question, how much characteristics, how many features of a country are due to the structure of federalism, as opposed to a variety of other features of that country? It's a really hard and challenging question, and nobody I know has satisfactorily answered it. But let me suggest this: if one looks abroad, one can begin to ask the question, if not answer it very satisfactorily. So what I have done, and what I'll sound very much like a professor just giving lots of sources and so on, but I'll try to hit the highlights here. There is a large literature among students of comparative politics that compare different countries along a variety of dimensions. One of those dimensions they compare is unitary, that is a single central authority, and federal, that is at least two or more horizontal structures of sovereignty or entrenched constitutional benefits or rights. And so another thing they look at is the degree to which a country is centralized or decentralized. Now, one of my points I'll get to and hammer back and hammer home is that we often confuse features that are better described as decentralization as federalism. Indeed, a great many people confuse decentralization and federalism, and so I will go through this. But let me identify a couple of scholars, comparative politics scholars, that have spoken to this issue, not quite in the way I want to. So I'm not wrenching their arguments out of context, but I'm extracting some observations they make from their own work that goes along. One of those is John Gehring, that teaches at Boston University, and the other is Eric Wibbles, now at Duke. I'm sorry that my colleague from Duke, Ernie, has left. But anyway, I want to look at those two for a minute. Here's what John Gehring did. John Gehring took a large N study, 70 countries. And they were not divided equally, but they were a lot. There were a lot of unitary countries, and there were a lot of federal countries, and the 70 around the world. They were good countries, bad countries, all the countries that he could readily get data on, and he began to examine their characteristics, their structural characteristics, the antecedents to those structural characteristics, to the point it could, and then what he thought were some of the consequences or some of the features of those countries, and he correlated them with, among other things, whether countries were unitary or whether they were federal. And so he asked the question. One of the questions he asked was pretty direct. How can a state best govern a diverse community? And in many federal countries, they are pretty diverse, but in maybe one of the most diverse European countries, at least was post-war, was the Netherlands, and it was governed not by a federal system, but by consociationalism, and it's probably one of the most peaceful countries and stable countries, and certainly one of the most democratic countries in Europe during that period. So at any rate, he looks at the 70-odd countries and trying to find out what's related with whom. Now, correlation is not causation, and he's very careful at that, and I want to emphasize I am too, but nevertheless, his findings are interesting. He reports that unitary systems, single structure governments, with proportional representation, not the single-member districts that we have, fare better than federal systems that in achieving a whole host of things that we would regard as beneficial that are included in the list of the Green Paper. One would be inclusion. One would be a strong and responsive bureaucracy, and the like. More specifically, he finds that what he doesn't call them unitary, calls them centripetal, because not only are they unitary, but they have proportional representation and a variety of other things. So he says the centripetal unity governments perform more effectively than federal or centrifugal governments on a variety of things. In particular, he looks at several qualities. One is bureaucratic quality, effectiveness, efficiency, the degree of corruption, to the extent that these can measure. Another is achieving tax revenues. Another is investment ratings, which countries have high investment, which in low investment. Trade openness, gross domestic product per capita, infant mortality, life expectancy, and illiteracy. So in all those dimensions, unitary governments fare better than federal systems. Now, he picked these various measures because he thought they were good indicators of either government effectiveness in a variety of ways or quality of life indicators. And if you don't like those indicators, he has a great many more that he would argue are so highly correlated with them that he didn't need to deal with all of them. Now, look, he recognizes the limits of his analysis. He acknowledges that that the data he selected weren't random, the countries weren't random. You can't generalize for a whole. You take countries as you get them, and so it's pretty hard to generalize it. But still, so you can't prove that this is the case. But on the other hand, what you might be able to do is disprove certain things. That is, scientists never prove anything so much as they disprove the alternatives. And so if you don't find a correlation between something, there's a good chance that you can't find correlation either. If you do find causation. If you do find let me repeat it. if you don't find correlation, there's not likely to be causation. If you do find correlation, there may or may not be causation. It's a matter of inference to determine. But if you can show there's no correlation, it's a pretty good, you can rest pretty sure that there's no causation. So he has that more modest goal. Now, his colleague in this enterprise, Eric Wibbles at Boston, does a similar sort of thing using slightly different data. One uses World Trade Organization, another uses International Monetary Fund data, and so on. And in his ongoing project, he too finds that unitary systems fare better on a variety of dimensions than federal systems do. Federal systems are less able than unitary systems to distribute resources proportionally. Another quote, a central weakness of federal systems is that their very structures overrepresent minority interest, and this in turn contributes to civil unrest and political instability, and so on and so on. So now Wibbles does something very interesting. Both these guys are methodologists of the first order. They both use multiple methods and multiple techniques. They do these big N studies looking at 50, 70, 80 countries using data that are provided by IMF and so on. And then they also do individual case studies, in-depth case studies of a handful of countries. And his argument is their findings reinforce each other. And so he's moderately confident in the correlations that he finds, and in making certain inferences about the benefits of unitary governments over federal systems. So then he asked the question, the obvious question: if federal systems, if unitary systems are consistently better on these variety of measures that most of us would think are important to measure, he says, why are federal systems created in the first place? So he asked the antecedent question, and his conclusion is that federal systems are created when there are inequalities among different regions. The elites will favor federalism because this weakens majority rule in the central government. And if you read some of the anti-federalist papers, I think that's kind of what they suggest. We don't read the anti-federalists, we only read the federalists now. And so this leads him to claim that central governments with federal systems is one of the reasons they have poor outcomes on these many dimensions. Now, there are a couple of other people whose work bears on this, and I'll mention them very briefly, and then I'll make a few concluding remarks and then shut up. Aaron Leipart is perhaps one of the leading comparative politics scholars of the late 20th century. He tried to find out why his country, a country riven with conflict, deep conflict, was so peaceful and stable, and if not fully democratic, pretty democratic, and that was the Netherlands. And he developed his argument that consociational governments governing through grand coalitions that draw in minority parties or parties on the out are more stable than simple, clear, full-fledged majoritarian parties, and that led him then to expand to look at democracies more generally. And he's written 2 or 3 books that look at 36 democracies, and they're roughly divided between unitary and federal countries. And he argues again that the big 3 things for him are unitary systems with parliamentary democracy and proportional representation. In a more recent book, just published with colleagues last year, he compares federal and unitary governments, and then highlights, it's a textbook in American politics, and he highlights the United States in the middle of in these 31 countries that he looks at, and he finds that something like this, that by and large, there is as much difference within unitary structures as there is within federal structures. So you cannot attribute any of these measures of political stability, democratic participation, social benefits, and so on, to one type of system or another. If anything, the unitary systems come out still better. Two other scholars I looked at, and I looked at them not so much to talk about unitary or federal systems, but to look at something, a kissing cousin of federalism, which is decentralization. And John Laughlin, now at Cambridge, has looked at local and regional finance in a host of European countries over the past 20 years. And two of his studies, one on Sweden and one on France, are instructive. In Sweden, he finds that a huge portion of taxing and the spending authority rests in the local government. It may even be higher than the United States if you contrast local, county, and state with the federal government. And he finds something of the same in France. But he finds that both taxing authority and spending authority are lodged in the local governments to a huge extent. I don't have the figures here, but it compares or exceeds the relations within the United States. But he goes on to then point out that this is not federalism, or doesn't appear to be federalism quite yet, because the national government caps the taxing rate and mandates the areas, health care and education in particular, that the expenditure has to be for, and then mandates standards for how it is to be expended. So on one hand, you have a national government setting a goal, a set of goals and missions, and then it delegates to the local government the taxing and spending authority to carry out those mandates. Something of the same exists in France. Now, France has to be, for those of us that are federalism junkies, we would know that France has to be considered, pardon me, one of the quintessential unitary centralized states. You remember de Gaulle, what is the France is me, he signified. And on the other hand, France has 2 to 3 times in absolute numbers the number of local governments than the United States does. I have the figures here. Let me just pull them out. I got lost here, but yes, France has 37,000 communes, municipality. 37,000. It has 100 departments. It has 2,700 and growing public corporations or special districts, as it were. And in contrast, the United States only has, think of it, the United States is what, 3 times the size, 4 times the size of France? The United States has only about 18,000 cities, another 3,000 counties, 50 states, and uncounted number of special districts. In fact, the literature on France that looks in detail in France says, we're falling apart. We're a fragmented country. Sounds familiar. Sounds like complaints about the United States. So France is more decentralized than the United States. Many of these units, the communes, existed well before the centralization of France under Napoleon, and some of them were created after, precisely to create districts that were amenable to control from Paris, but these various regions, that is the communes, the departments, and the regions also, and the special districts also have vast taxing and spending authority. And again, they are controlled to some extent because the tax ceilings are set by Paris, the national government, and the areas in which the expenditures that take place are specified by the government, and of course standards are set by the national government. Some have called this the development in both Sweden and France the federalization of these countries. And clearly the decentralization, but it's not clear it's the federalization, because in every case, the powers, the ultimate powers are entrenched in the Constitution, are designated as the national government, and these authorities are delegated to the state and or the local and regional districts, and they note a pendulum effect. In good times, there's decentralization. In bad times, there's more centralization. So it's not clear that this is the emergence of federalism. Now, if these scholars are correct, if they're correct, that is, all these, and I should emphasize, and in terms of the measures of liberty, freedom that we normally think of, the countries that score highest on these scales tend to be the Northern European unitary countries. So it's not clear that liberty is something distinctive to federal systems, but it may be related. I'm not suggesting it's not, but again, I want to emphasize that on these many different indicators of quality of government and quality of life, there's no great distinction between unitary and federal systems. So then the question is, if this is right, why are we so preoccupied with federalism? Well, I have two answers, and they're both pretty good. One is, we are Americans, and we live in a federal system of sorts, and we have to, as a member of the legislature, he has to deal with the problem tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And the cases come to the courts, and the courts have to answer them. So it's a practical matter. As citizens, we're found in the situation where God placed us in, and we have to do the best we can, and that's living with the conditions that surround us, and at best marginally making the difference. So that's a good reason enough. To be good citizens is to pay attention to the political conditions under which we live in. But I think there is another reason as well. And here I will blame the economists, and whoever organized the conference here was I don't know whether you're remiss or it was a good thing, but I didn't notice any economists. I noted my political science and law school colleagues around here. But the second one is this. I think we have been seduced by the economists, because there are a lot of powerful economic models that deal with federalism, or a lot of economists have taken some of the bromides that are captured here and elsewhere and turned them into economic models, and because they are powerful and because they are parsimonious, we like them and we think they're right. But let me suggest, almost every one of these models is not a model of federalism, but is a model of decentralization. And maybe at times even centralization. Let me just take a few, and I'll tick them off very quickly, and maybe we can elaborate. One is fiscal federalism. The name is there. Fiscal federalism is a theory that says we ought to have special districts to deal with the production of public goods. We want a district that has fiscal equivalencies so that the beneficiaries are the ones that pay for the public good. That makes a lot of sense. So if you have a water catchment area, you want a water district. If you have a problem with transportation, you want a transportation district. If you have air pollution, you want an air pollution district, in which the beneficiaries of clean air are going to be the ones that pay for the costs of correcting the problem. That makes sense. But this is not federalism at all. This is decentralization. This is central government saying we have a problem, and the problem involves southern Utah and northern Arizona, and so we'll create a special district, and we'll make sure we'll deal with the coal pollution from the energy plants down near the Grand Canyon, or what have you. Or you live in Washington, you live in New York City, and you have the Metropolitan Transportation Authority that deals with transportation problems in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, the surrounding states. So you create a district that will, the Port Authority, that will deal with these. That makes a lot of sense. This is not federalism. This is central administrators saying we got a problem, and so we're going to create a special problem. But it's called fiscal federalism. Now, I've been lamenting this misnomer a long time until I came across an article by the dean of the School of Fiscal Federalism, Wally Oates, who says, oops, we used the wrong name. This isn't really federalism in the way that political scientists or constitutional lawyers use. This is decentralization, of course. But we're stuck with the name we use, just like libertarians are now stuck as being called conservatives and that sort of thing that you're familiar with. So fiscal federalism is one problem. Let me identify a couple of others. There are a variety of people, and I'm sorry that Michael Grieve is not here because he's one of them that talks about market-enhancing federalism. And institutional arrangements that enhance markets. And you got a little bit of that this morning. This is not federalism. Federalism is a historic compromise between various parties in which they agree to share power. It's an economist talking about, or a political scientist adopting an economist model. Economists talk about the firm wanting to maximize this. Economists are always identifying the purposes of an organization or a person. We want to maximize our interests. And in this case, Michael and others have asserted market-enhancing maximization, and they attribute it to federalism. Federalism is a division of power, and there could be all sorts of reasons for the division of power, and it would be a happy coincidence if one of them is to enhance. Indeed, the people that use market-enhancing federalism almost all come up with examples that are not federal, but are instances of a central government creating a central bank, that creating a limited government and guaranteeing property rights. Well, a central government that guarantees a central bank and limited government is not federal. It could be the British parliamentary system, as indeed one of the examples comes from. So I could go through the same thing, and I can talk about competitive federalism, a variation on that. I could talk about liberty-enhancing federalism, or I could talk about experiment-inducing federalism. Each of those metaphors, each of these adjectives, if taken seriously, implies a clear objective goal that is part and parcel of the term federalism that may or may not be there, since federalism is basically a deal in which power is split. And the reason it is split is because no single party could dominate the others, and they agreed the compromise would satisfy them all, be a second-best solution for all of them. And they have a variety of different interests. So what looks like federalism, even in the United States, is often not federalism, but decentralization. Thank you.